Hello, and welcome to Studyology Session 3. So these recorded Studyology sessions, are for students who have wanted to do the Studyology program but haven't been able to attend one of the live versions, either face-to-face or online, or for those of you who have done the program before, who have been attending the sessions but want an opportunity to revise some of the content. And there's a good chance that I'll cover a little bit of, or a few other things in the recorded version that I may not necessarily have covered in the face-to-face version. So it can be a useful point of revision. So we're up to session 3 now. If you haven't had a chance to look at sessions 1 and 2, I do recommend that. Once we get into this point of the program, it is really useful to have that basic knowledge from those first 2 sessions before venturing into this one. There are some concepts that we'll teach in this that are certainly standalone and can be useful, but like I said, it is good at this point to be familiar with the content of those first 2 videos. It's also good to be familiar with the content of the little mini workbook that we introduced you to in that first session and talked about again in the second session. This workbook is the accompaniment to these recordings. It's a place to record your reflections as part of the sessions themselves. It's a place to get an overview of some of the techniques. It's a place to access what the homework exercises are. It's also the place in which to do some reflections on the homework exercises themselves. So if you don't have this, it'll be linked with the video itself, but this is kind of your companion throughout the program. When we run the live sessions, we take a moment at the beginning of each session, certainly in sessions 2, 3, 4 and 5, we take a moment at the beginning to get present. That's not necessarily quite as relevant to you in the video realm, or perhaps it is actually, but the process of getting present can be as simple as just taking a few deep breaths. Can be as simple as just tuning into your senses, sense of sound, what you can hear around you, sense of sight, what you can see around you, sense of touch, what you can feel around you, what you can smell and what you can taste. And if you remember in the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise introduced in session 1, I believe, that is an exercise to get present that does involve the 5 senses. The purpose of getting present, and it's built into really one of the core skills that we teach in this program, is that if you don't take the opportunity to get into the present moment, to break out of whatever sort of autopilot thinking or feeling mode you're in, it's difficult then to focus in on the task that you want to do. But getting present, like I said, doesn't need to be a long, drawn-out exercise. It can simply be something as simple as taking a few deep breaths. So I encourage you, as you kick into this video, maybe even just hitting pause, taking a few kind of deep breaths, maybe saying to yourself, I'm here, wherever that is for you, like your bedroom or the lounge room or the library or the university lecture or theatre or something like that. I'm here, and I'm here to do this task, which in this case is to watch this video and absorb some information about procrastination. And I encourage you to get into the habit of doing that when you kind of start any study period, any sort of study session. Take a moment at the beginning to note where you are, how you feel, where you're at, what your intentions are, and what you're going to use the time coming up to do. So, and you'll actually find that that's sort of built into the process that we're teaching. So when we, particularly at the end of this session, we'll be talking a bit more about developing a bit of a ritual that you use at the beginning of a study session, and it will include in it some sort of exercise to be present or to ground yourself. Alrighty, a quick recap of what we covered in the second video. So we in that second session or the second video, we talked about experiential avoidance, and we talked about experiential avoidance being the actions that we undertake to avoid uncomfortable sensations or thoughts or feelings or memories, or to avoid the situations that give rise to those uncomfortable sensations, thoughts and feelings and memories. So when we might avoid sitting down to do an assignment because when we do, it brings up thoughts of not being good enough or being worried about the outcome or being unsure of our capacity to do it. And then we don't really want those thoughts and feelings. They make us uncomfortable. They distress us. And so then we not only try to sort of suppress those thoughts and feelings themselves, but then we're likely to disconnect from the activity itself. Right? And in the process of disconnecting from the activity and going and doing something else, we alleviate that short-term distress, but we create a medium to long-term problem for ourselves, which is that task still needs to get done, that essay still needs to get written. And then the next time we come back to it, we're going to be confronted with an even more distressing state, because not only are we unsure of our capacity to do the essay, but now we've got less time to do it in. And so you can see pretty quickly that experiential avoidance can become a problem when it's taking us away from activities that are beneficial for us, things that we need to do, and the things that are going to help us grow. And it can become a bit of a pattern, and it can become a pattern of avoidance that almost becomes so sort of well established that it just almost happens without us even really having a conscious awareness of it. And for any of us who've really got trapped in cycles of procrastination, we know that it can get to a point where we're almost not even aware that we're procrastinating. We just frequently find ourselves not doing the thing that we need to do. If you missed that session, I definitely where we talked about this chart in particular. I encourage you to go back and have a look at that. This chart's pretty central to your kind of understanding of the procrastination cycle. We'll talk about it quickly again, but for more detail, head back to that video too. So if you remember, we had this image here where we've got our stress or distress level on the bottom, and then we've got our performance level on the vertical axis. And what we're saying is that for any kind of complex tasks tend to follow this inverted U shape, which means if we've got no stress, and we're not the slightest bit sort of worked up about it, our performance isn't actually going to be that great, right? That's us sitting on the couch not doing anything really. If we're too distressed, like we're in a state of panic, our performance also suffers, right? And there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle where we're there is some level of stress there. There's some level of arousal, focus and concentration, a little bit of adrenaline pumping, not too much, but enough. And that's where we find our highest performance. And in its perfect state, it kind of looks like a state of flow, right? Where we're immersed in an activity, we're working at it well, we're just at the edge of our knowledge, but we're operating well. We're learning, we're developing, we're creative, we're innovative. The rest of the world seems to fall off to the side. We're not thinking about other stuff. We're not easily distracted. We're kind of we're in the zone, so to speak. That's the ultimate manifestation of it. We don't always get to work in the zone. It'd be great if we did, but that's not always the case. And even someone who's working in the zone can still be prone to some distractions or prone to a little bit of loss of concentration along the way. But they just generally feel as though they're pretty well focused on the task at hand. Now that's the sort of ideal scenario, but then what we did slowly over the course of that session was look at all the different parts of this diagram, and what we talked about is really what happens on either side. So we talked about the pain of getting started. So this is the kind of stress that emerges as we sit down to do a task that's important or difficult or challenging. And that pain can take many forms. It might be frustration, anxiety, it might be confusion. It can even be boredom. Sometimes if the task is complex, but we're not particularly interested in it. And so the emergence of these unpleasant emotions often triggers an experiential avoidance. We don't want those feelings, so we head off and we do activities that either alleviate the feeling or replace it with something more enjoyable. And we talked about all the different kinds of procrastination classics that people engage in. So immersive activities, doing something that's just really engaging instead of the task, which maybe not as engaging. We do another task that is a good thing to do. It's still an achievement, but it's not the achievement we need to be working on. And we went through a bunch of others, and they all showed up in your little mini workbook as well. We've got a big list of them just here, the different types of procrastination. And most people look through that list and identify that they engage in a few of these or have engaged in a few of these over time. And then you usually find there's one or two that are probably more common for you, more that are more characteristic of your kind of unique style of procrastination. So that's what happens on this side of the curve, right? But if you keep doing that, eventually you get this build-up of tasks, build-up of things that you've got to do, and you get the deadlines for when those things are getting closer and closer, at which point we often shift over to a panic mode. Right, now we've got 2 essays that need to be done in under a week, or we've got an essay due in the next day, and we're only just starting it that day. Now, we can work under these scenarios, and let's face it, a lot of student work is done the night before, but the quality of that work is impaired, right? And it's not as creative, it's not as innovative, and there's no contingency time left to do drafts or modifications or changes, and it's typically an unpleasant experience. So most people, they're happy when it's done. So you catch a student the next day after they've pulled an all-nighter, they're really happy that the work is done, but they probably wouldn't describe the experience as being particularly pleasant. And we also know that they potentially haven't really learned the material or processed the material in the same way as if they had sat with it over multiple sessions over a couple of weeks. So they've managed to produce something, but whether or not it's really actually stuck in their head is another thing altogether. So the work is not, on this side, is not as fun and is not as rewarding and is not as impactful. And then what ends up happening is if you cycle between the two of these, your whole study experience becomes characterized by either being in a state of procrastination or in a state of panic. So you rarely get this experience of working to your optimal level, working in an optimal way. And that can kind of color the whole study academic experience, which is a real shame, because then people start to find university to be a drag, right? And I'm not pretending as though all aspects of university are one constant party, but it is possible to actually enjoy the learning component of university and not be stuck in one of these two kind of states, this procrastination, putting stuff off state, or this panic, doing things at the last minute state. If that diagram doesn't kind of float your boat, there is another way of kind of conceptualizing this material, which isn't too bad. And that's to think of it as a cycle. You can actually also imagine this as a spiral, because it tends to get worse over time. So with each successive turn, it gets more kind of severe in its nature. But it starts with this forming an intention to work. When we sit down to work, or when we form an intention to work, something shows up. I don't necessarily know what it is. It can be a variety of different things, but it's usually difficult content of some sort, some negative thoughts about ourselves, or some unpleasant sensations or feelings. It activates experiential avoidance. Our procrastination strategies emerge, so we look to detach from the task, and we look to find something that elicits a more positive experience. That leads us to delay the tasks. They build up. It means we end up doing that work in a panic. We experience that work as aversive, and it's of a lower quality. We rarely get to experience that working in our optimal state. And then when the next job comes along and we form an intention to do that work, now we get even more difficult content showing up. So we don't even get we get the original difficult content, But now we get some of the difficult content that relates to having done this previous work in a panic. Right, so we start a new essay, but we've still got the negative memories and implications of the previous essay, if that makes sense. And that's why you can imagine it as a spiral over time. And so the homework exercise from session 2, and you may or may not have done it in the context of watching these videos. Most people can obviously get away with not doing the homework exercise if they're doing this course via video rather than doing it via live to live, where I can hassle you a bit more face to face. But the recommendation from session 2 as a homework exercise was to start getting better at observing your unique procrastination strategies. And in fact, we put a table here in the mini workbook to allow you to do that. So it's just a basic 7-day kind of diary system. It's got each of the different types of procrastination strategies along the side here, and you can go up a page to kind of get their definitions. And you're simply just putting in here whether or notice that you engaged in that one on that day. So this might be something you can do at the end of the day as you're sitting back reflecting over the day, you're watching some TV, or you're on your phone at the end of the night. It's getting close to when you go to bed. You can think about, in terms of the work you had to do today, what kinds of avoidance strategies did you notice showed up? Did you find yourself doing immersive activities? Did you find yourself fusing with this fairy tale thinking like, I can do it tomorrow, or tomorrow will be a better day, or I'll have more energy tomorrow, I can do a better job of it then? Maybe feelings of perfectionism showed up, and you got sort of kind of derailed by the concerns about not being able to do the work of good enough quality, and therefore didn't even get started with the work at all. And so you can look at across the week what kind of strategies show up, what kind of procrastination strategies show up. And then on the basis of that week, you can engage in a general reflection exercise, like what are your most common ones? What is it that you think you're avoiding when the procrastination shows up? Like, what is it? Is it boredom that you're trying to avoid? Is it anxiety? Is it stress? Is it confusion? Is it that you want to avoid that feeling of not knowing what you're doing, especially if you're studying a topic that's difficult to understand? And whilst this is the exercise for week 2, this is something that I recommend you try and become better at over time as a whole, better at noticing when different procrastination strategies have shown up. And you can use this system, or just simply, like I said, a simple evening meditation where you look back over the day and review which procrastination strategies showed up and what you might try to put in place the next day to manage them. Just start to become and get your radar more attuned to when and how you are procrastinating. Alrighty, so in terms of the new content for today's session, we're going to be focusing on 3 concepts: diffusion, acceptance, and grounding. So one thing that kind of characterizes this session as a bit different from the previous 2 is that in the previous 2, I've really got you focused on noticing. So after session 1, I got you to focus on noticing what shows up when you sit down to study, when you or form an intention to study, or sit down at your desk at the beginning of the day to start studying. What is it that shows up for you psychologically? What kinds of thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories? And then in the second session, I got you to notice, well, what kind of procrastination strategies show up? So up until now, it's been a real focus on noticing, getting you to become more aware of what the experience of getting started with study feels like for you at a kind of an internal level. In this session, we actually want to start practicing and developing the toolkit to help you get back on track. So these are some of the actions you can take to manage some of the difficult things that arise, to manage the difficult thoughts, to manage difficult feelings, to ground and calm yourself when you're in a state of high distress. So it's actually starting to build your toolkit of things to do under the different kind of scenarios. Now, to develop that toolkit, or to think about the tools in that toolkit, we just want to return to this curve. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at tools, psychological tools that you can use on this side of the curve, so that you can use on the side of the curve where procrastination is the thing that is dominant here, let's say, is the thing that is the issue, where experiential avoidance is leading us to disconnect from the task and go and do something else. And then also getting us to think of what kind of tools do you have available to you to use on this side of the curve, where really the dominant theme is kind of panicked work, right? Being in a panicked work state. And what can you do on that side to make to improve the outcomes of that scenario. So we'll start with the left-hand side of the curve, and probably these are tools, to be honest, which can be used on either side of the curve, but they make the most sense when we're thinking about it on this side. So we've said this a few times, I've said this a few times already in this video and previous videos, but I repeat it because it's worth getting this concept into your head, which is that when you sit down to study, or you form the intention to study, some kinds of combinations of thoughts and feelings and memories and sensations will emerge. Right? So when I sat down to study today, when I sat down to work today, I had a whole lot of thoughts about, I had kind of, mildly panicked thoughts which related to all the things that I felt I needed to do. So I had a very busy, kind of but scattered brain. I could think of all these tasks that needed to be done, but there wasn't really any kind of calm or order in my mind as to laying those out. And so you sit down to work and you have that experience. You find yourself thinking in a certain way, and if you're not careful, if it's an unpleasant, particularly collection of thoughts or feelings, there's the risk that you will detach from what it is you need to do. So, I might have sat down, fired up the computer, and then just sort of opened social media or the news or YouTube or something like that I could kind of distract myself with, turn off those kind of panicked or frustrating thoughts. Or, maybe at that time I would have decided, actually I think I'll get breakfast instead, or I'll go and make a cup of tea, or I'll go and stand outside for a while and get some sunlight. And so at the point at which we sit down to do the work, some stuff that can show up that then quickly derails us from the thing we need to do. That's when all our different procrastination strategies show up. Now, underpinning that is this experiential avoidance idea that we're generally unwilling, and we don't want to have these difficult experiences. And therefore we're motivated to move towards activities that don't elicit those feelings, or in contrast elicit more positive feelings. So I could sit at my desk and I could worry about the things that I've got to do today, or I could go outside and enjoy the sunshine, hear the birds and look at the plants and things like that. And that's not a bad thing to do, to head out and enjoy some time in nature, but it's not the great thing to do if I actually need to be sitting here at this desk doing the work that I need to. Now, the problem for you is, it's the same for me, it's just a different context, is that if we want to get the benefits of study, or we want to get the benefits of work, then we're going to need to find a way to sit with those difficult things that show up. I'm going to need to find a way to sit with that difficult, scattered thinking that shows up. And then what does that look like? What is the psychological toolkit that allows us to sit better with that kind of material? So in the context of the original diagram I showed you in session 1, this diagram that captures the sort of 3 components of psychological flexibility, what we're talking about here is this part, the open up part. We make room for difficult experiences, and if we make room for them, psychologically what that means is that rather than simply using those experiences as a kind of an excuse or permission to go off and do something else, we make room for those and instead remain in contact with the task that we need to do. So what can I do with my scattered thoughts that allows me to have them there but also get on with my work? And there's two strategies that we're going to cover. They're similar in that they both are intended to help you learn to sit better with unpleasant internal experiences. They're different in that they focus on different internal experiences, if that makes sense. So diffusion tends to focus on finding distance from difficult thoughts or beliefs. So we might sit down to do some work, particularly if it's challenging work, and we might notice that our thoughts become quite self-critical, like I'm not good enough to do this, or I got this wrong last time, am I going to stuff this up again? This work's too hard for me, I'm not smart enough to do this. So there might be some kind of self-critical self-evaluations in there. It might be some thoughts about the work itself. This work is too hard, this work's not very interesting, this is going to take forever, what's the point, I don't really get why this is relevant. It might be some negative thoughts about the person who set the assignment, right? You know, the lecturer doesn't get this stuff, or why would they make an essay on this topic, or I don't see the relevance of this to what it is that we're doing. And so all of these different kinds of thoughts can show up at the point at which we sit down to do the work. And any one or number of those thoughts might be used might act as a trigger for us to disconnect from the task. This essay is too hard, I'm going to go and do something else instead that's easier. This essay makes no sense, I don't see why we should be doing this essay, and you go off and spend time working on something else. And so these thoughts or beliefs that show up can be a primary derailing engine, and a diffusion exercise is about treating our thoughts as events rather than facts. Right? We have a tendency that if a thought pops up in our head, that we assume it to be true. So if I have the thought, I'm stupid and I don't get this, we tend to hold that to be at least partially true. Maybe I am stupid and maybe I am not going to get this. But in most cases, thoughts are they're either wrong, or even if they're right, they miss all the nuance and subtlety of the situation. So the thought, I'm not good enough, might have some element of truth to it, in as much as, you know, you're going to have to practice this a few times to get a hold of it. But I'm not good enough misses all the nuance of how you would get better with practice. What will happen if you engage with that material on multiple times and get more familiar with it, and it will become easier as you go along. So the thought might have a little bit of truth to it, but often misses the nuance of the situation. But if we hold it to be true, then, and treat it as though it is true, it can have a kind of a catastrophic impact on our engagement with that particular task. So a diffusion exercise is about finding some distance from difficult thoughts and beliefs, and we do that by treating them as events rather than facts. So let's have a bit of a quick practice at that process, so you can get a sense of what I mean by this idea of treating a thought as an event, treating thoughts as events rather than treating them as facts. Alrighty, I'm just going to pull up this exercise here. Alrighty, so for this exercise, I just want you to find a comfortable position, and you can either close your eyes or just rest them gently on some sort of fixed spot within the room, or a spot in front of you. Often kind of lowering the gaze is easiest, but close your eyes if you're happy to do so. And then when you have, I just want you to visualize yourself sitting beside a gently flowing stream. And the stream's got kind of leaves that are floating on the surface of the water, and you can see them go by. So there must be a kind of autumn tree further up along the stream that's dropping these leaves, and they float on the top of the window, and they on the water, and they float on past you. And then for the next minute or so, I just want you to take each thought that enters into your mind and place it on a leaf, right? And then let that leaf float by. And do this with each thought, whether it's pleasurable or painful or neutral. Whether the thought presents itself as an image, something you can see, or whether it presents itself like a phrase or a statement. I just want you to take each thought, each image, and place it on a leaf, and then let that leaf float by. And you can really kind of imagine the process of almost picking the thought out of your head and quite deliberately placing it on to a leaf and letting it go by. And different thoughts and beliefs might float by at different speeds. Right? Some might hang around. A leaf gets stuck on part of the stream, and it's hard to let a thought go by. That's okay. Just let it move at its own pace. If it gets stuck, just allow it to hang around until it's ready to float by. And if your mind says that this is dumb, or this exercise isn't working, or I don't know what I'm supposed to do, take that thought, imagine placing it on a leaf, and imagine that leaf floating by like the rest of them. And then notice that from time to time your thoughts might try to hook you in, right, and distract you from the exercise. You'll lose internal sight of the stream, you'll lose internal sight of the process, and find yourself wrapped up in a particular thought about the past or about the future, or wrapped up by some distraction in the present. And there's no need to worry about that. That's what minds do. Simply return yourself back to being alongside the stream and taking each of those thoughts and beliefs, and maybe feelings and sensations as well. Maybe you end up feeling some kind of some pain or discomfort somewhere in the body. Imagine taking that, placing it on a leaf, and letting that float on by. And then know that you can use other visual metaphors as well if you want. So leaves on a stream is a classic, but you might decide you wanted to use clouds in the sky. The clouds are slowly moving by. A colleague of mine likes the adverts on a bus, imagines themselves at the side of a road and they're watching buses go by, and as each bus goes by they imagine almost kind of throwing their thoughts onto the side of the bus as though they were like advertisements, right? And then throw that particular thought onto that bus and then watch as that bus drives off and the next bus comes along. There's a steady stream of buses coming by, maybe like a busy London street or something. I'll link you to a video after this that uses the sushi train metaphor. So imagine you sitting there at the sushi restaurant and the sushi train's coming past and you're putting different kinds of thoughts onto the sushi train and they're disappearing around the corner. You're sending your particular thoughts around to someone else at a different part of the restaurant. And then there was a student once who used rocks into lava, so they imagined themselves standing at the side of a stream of hot molten lava as though it was coming out of the volcano and running down the side of the mountain. They imagined this lava stream of lava going past, and they would throw their thoughts into that stream of lava, and as the thoughts went in they would sort of dissolve, and then that would kind of float on by. They would take each thought or memory or feeling or sensation and imagine throwing it into the lava. I did quite like that one. Whatever your preference, it's a metaphor for actually noticing that thoughts and beliefs and sensations and feelings have a half-life, right? And that what that means is they will come and they will go, and they will come and go at different rates, and some thoughts will be and beliefs will be stickier than others, and some thoughts will kind of hijack our attention and take us away for a while, but we can always come back to this notion and this recognition that thoughts will come and go, and that we can use this visual metaphor to strengthen our recognition of that observation. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to the session. Alrighty, so a few things to note about that particular exercise, a few things to kind of keep in mind. So you'll notice with a diffusion exercise that we're not trying to challenge the thought. We're not trying to assess its veracity or its truthfulness. We're learning simply to notice that thoughts come and go, and that they can be simply noticed rather than engaged with in any way, shape or form. So the opposite of diffusion, which we're doing here, is fusion. So to fuse with a thought means to really inhabit it, to hold it to be true. If I were to fuse with the thought that I'm not a good person, then I would come to believe wholeheartedly that I'm not a good person is an accurate description of who I am. So in a diffusion exercise, we're trying to treat that thought simply as something that has shown up, not some grand assessment of who we are or an accurate representation of reality, just simply a kind of a mental event that can come and go. And the goal with diffusion is not to get rid of the thoughts. Like your mind will produce thoughts in an ongoing way. It's partly a reflection of the underlying processes that are taking place in your brain. It's partly a reflection of what it means to be a kind of a conscious creature, a sentient creature. So it's not that we want to make these thoughts go away, it's that we want to improve our capacity to sit with and notice them. And that the more capable we get at that process, the more capable we get at being able to do the things that are important to us whilst experiencing those thoughts at the same time. Those thoughts don't derail us. We don't use them as excuses or permission to disconnect from the activity we're doing. We don't use them as a trigger to avoid situations or places or people or tasks that have caused us difficulty in the past. We find that we're able to do what it is we need to do and at the same time hold these thoughts and beliefs in place. And I think of it as getting enough wriggle room to reorient ourselves, to reorient our attention to the task. So rather than our attention being hijacked by this stream of thinking, we can notice the stream of thinking while still being able to divert our attention back to the task at hand. Alrighty, the second technique I want to cover is an acceptance technique. It's similar, as I said, in process, where the goal is to make room for difficult internal content. The difference with acceptance tasks, they tend to be focused more on feelings and sensations, emotions, feelings, physical body sensations. And it's good to have both sets of techniques, because when we're talking about difficult internal experiences, these things tend to come in packages, right? So if you say, for example, you got an essay back with a bad grade, and you weren't expecting it, and it's come as quite a shock. At the point at which you discover that, a whole lot of things are going to show up internally. So there'll be a feeling component to it. So you feel sad or angry or disappointed, or kind of a combination of a bunch of different ones. There'll be some physical sensations that come along with that, maybe a sinking in the stomach, a little bit of tightness in the chest, constriction of the throat, maybe some weight or feeling of weight behind the eyes, maybe sort of the precursor to tears or something like that. There'll be some thoughts that show up, so some kind of why me, what happened, I don't know what I did wrong, maybe I'm not cut out for this, or the lecturer's not a nice person, or there's going to be a whole range of those show up. It might activate some more core beliefs you have about yourself or the future or the world, your life at uni. And you get the whole kind of package, right? You get the difficult thoughts and feelings and sensations all showing up as a group. Now, the diffusion strategy is good in terms of handling some of the mental chatter that shows up, the thoughts component. But what do you do with the feelings and the physical sensations? And acceptance-based techniques, and the one we'll cover, which is noticing and naming, can be useful in terms of managing some of that, some of the emotional stuff that shows up. So, as with the other, let's have a quick practice of that task now. So, as with last time, I just want you to find a comfy position and then close your eyes if you're comfy, or, like I said, just rest your eyes gently on a point in front of you somewhere. Take a couple of deep breaths. And then I want you to try and notice how you're feeling right now. And start by trying to find a word or a name that you would give to that feeling. It's okay to search for a little while to find the right word or the right name for the feeling. Maybe you're feeling relaxed or a little bit tense, agitated, maybe bored, frustrated, happy. If it's a mix, feel free to use kind of multiple words to capture how you're feeling. And settle on a couple that describe it well. And then just turn that into a sentence. So right now I am feeling, and then whatever the word or words that best suit that. I then want you to notice where in the body this feeling or this emotion or this combination of emotions is felt. Like, what bodily sensations tell you that you're feeling that way? So if it's anxiety, is there some tension in the muscles, or some butterflies in the stomach or tummy? If it's angry, is there like some tension in the throat? Or if it's sad, is it some weight behind the eyes? Like, try and find where in the body you're getting the information about how it is you're feeling. And then when you've noticed where in the body it is, notice what it actually feels like. Like, is it a difference in temperature or tension, tightness or a restriction, maybe an emptiness or an airiness or a weight? And as you start to get a feel for both of those, build those into a sentence as well. So your first sentence, right now I'm feeling however you're feeling, and I can feel it in these parts of my body, and then list those off. And it feels like, and then describe kind of the nature of how it feels. And then I want you to take a moment to just try and understand why it is you might be feeling that way at this moment. Maybe you've got something coming up that is a little bit stressful, or maybe something that happened today. Maybe something went well or something didn't go so well. And the emotion feels as though it's like a kind of like a result of that, a consequence of that. And again, you can kind of build that into your description. So right now I'm feeling this way. I can feel it in these parts of my body. It feels like, describe the sensation. And I think I'm feeling this way because, and the reason you think you're feeling that way. And then I want you to let yourself know that it's okay that you're feeling that way. That it makes sense. There's nothing wrong about feeling that way. It's not bad for you to feel that way. Don't hold the fact that you're feeling that way against you in any way. And actually see if you can give yourself permission to, regardless of how you feel, be okay with feeling that way. Knowing that at some point in time it will change, at some point in time it will shift, and another feeling will come by, or another set of feelings will come by. And then build that acceptance into the statements as well. So right now I'm feeling however it is you're feeling. I can feel it in these parts of my body. It feels like I think I'm feeling this way because, and it's okay that I am feeling this way. I can accept that I am feeling this way. And that at some point, these feelings will move on and be replaced by other feelings. And when that happens, I'll be able to make room for them as well. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes or kind of bring your attention back. And we can take a little moment to just kind of explore some aspects of that process as well. So when we're doing acceptance exercises, what we're really trying to do is kind of welcome rather than attempt to suppress difficult feelings or sensations. Noticing how we're feeling, giving the feeling a name, noticing where in the body it's experienced, what it feels like, looking to understand, at least at a simple level, what we think might have given rise to the feeling, and then accepting that it's there and making room for it. And sometimes we hear this exercise called an expansion exercise, so sometimes we're actually encouraged to see if we can grow that feeling. Now that tends to be easier to do when maybe what we notice is a nice feeling, and we can imagine growing a sensation of maybe compassion or relaxation, or growing a sense of happiness or joy or curiosity. We can do the same though with an unpleasant feeling, and in fact people are encouraged to, as they get more capable with this task, more capable might not be the word, more experienced with using this psychological tool. So we would notice, what would it feel like to expand the anxiety? What would it feel like to expand the stress? Actually let that emotion take up additional room or space within us. And then what we're discovering in many ways is we're trying to get as close to and as knowledgeable about the feeling and sensation as we can, as an antidote to just trying to simply push it down, or avoid it, or go and do something that will take our minds off it. That we're becoming familiar with and welcoming of these feelings into our kind of internal experience. And there's a paradox here, which is, as we in both the cases of diffusion and acceptance, is that as we make room for these things and welcome them and make space for them, they have less of a control or less of a grip on our attentional and our concentration capacities. So that if we make room for sadness, we can both have the sadness and also progress on the things that we need to do as well. Direct our attention to the other things that we might need to continue on with in our lives, or the things that we have to do. And so that's a little bit of a paradox in these exercises. As we make room for these things, we also improve our capacity to hold them whilst doing other things. And that's an important kind of essence to this program, and an important essence to these psychological skills, is you know the thing that you're supposed to be doing, the other thing that you want to be diverting your attention to. That's your study, that's your tasks, that's your essays, that's the quizzes, that's the readings, it's all the things that you know you have to do to become a master of your particular topic. You know what it is, the task that you have to do, and what you're doing is finding a way to minimize the impact of these things that take you away from that task. And what I'm encouraging you to do here is utilize these strategies to both make room for and be willing to have these experiences that show up. And it will be kind of an essence of what I'll encourage you to practice between this session and session 4. Alrighty, a quick summary of what we've just covered there. So diffusion and acceptance are psychological techniques that help us make room for difficult thoughts, feelings and memories. The goal is not to change our experience. Rather, the goal is to develop the capacity to sit with difficult thoughts and feelings, to not be dragged into or captured by them, and instead develop the wiggle room necessary to refocus on the task at hand, the valued activity. And that phrase, the valued activity, that will come up in session 4. I'll explain to you a bit more about that process as well. Now I want you to, practice these activities as often as you can. I recommend doing these at the point at which you form an intention to or sit down to study at any point in time, so that you actually start to develop a bit of a ritual or a routine that precedes you engaging in your studies, the same way as I might proceed, and I do have a kind of a ritual that I follow before I start my work day, right, before I fire up my computer and set everything up and get going here. There's a kind of a ritual that leads into that process. And what I'm asking, and that ritual can include a whole lot of things like making a cup of tea and grabbing a biscuit and, if you're working from home like me, putting on your Ugg boots or something like that, comfy clothes, work clothes, whatever that is. So there's already some ritual elements that lead into work. What we're doing here is adding some additional psychological rituals to that process. So engaging in a diffusion exercise, a leaves on a stream meditation, engaging in an acceptance exercise, so taking the time to note and sit with the feelings that are there. Or maybe one of the activities that we'll just describe now. So what we've been discussing up until now has been what we do on the left-hand side of the curve. Right. What we're interested also in is what you do on the right-hand side of the curve. So the difference between these is that on the left-hand side of the curve, you have these kind of emerging levels of frustration or distress, right? That really start to kick in at the point at which you decide to work on the tasks. So you're dealing with emergent phenomena, so to speak. Whereas on the right-hand side of the task, what you tend to be dealing with is finding yourself in a state of panic or high level of distress, right? Like I said, this is the night before, or this is something else has gone on that day that's been highly distressing, and then you're sitting down to try and do some work, but you're in this really overwrought state. What do you do at that point? So it's worth noting that both the diffusion and the acceptance exercises that we did previously are good for this side of the curve as well. So at a point at which we find ourselves in a highly stressed mindset or headset, those exercises can be equally as beneficial during that time as well. But sometimes people might want to lead into those exercises with something that's just a little bit calming, just a little bit that takes a little bit off the edge, takes a little bit of the edge off, particularly the feeling state. And if we were thinking about it from the perspective of the functioning of our nervous system, it might be we feel as though our sympathetic nervous system has been very highly activated. We're very much kind of cortisol and adrenaline driven at that point in time, and what we want to do is a task that actually starts to begin to turn that system off and maybe starts to turn on our parasympathetic nervous system, the more rest and digest part of our. So we might use one of these more grounding or arousal reduction strategies before using a diffusion or acceptance exercise, simply because it helps to take a little bit off the edge. Now the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that we did in session 1 can be a good exercise here. Consider that to be a good grounding exercise. So it utilizes the 5 senses to kind of draw attention away from stressors and instead attention to the senses, attention to the present moment. So it can be a useful strategy at this point as well. Breathing exercises can also be a particularly kind of powerful method to use to reduce our overall level of arousal. And breathing modification is one of the methods, one of the inroads we have into our nervous system. And we don't necessarily have heaps of those. A lot of what's happening in our nervous system is operating without our conscious choice and dictation. But in this case, breathing can be one of the entry points into some degree of modification of the nervous system, particularly the level of activation of either the sympathetic or the parasympathetic. So there's a few different breathing techniques. I would encourage you to grab the slides and link to a couple of these tools that I've indicated here. Also do some searches on these different breathing techniques. It's just a sec. Go and do a Google search. There's a 478 is quite well described online. You'll get you'll be able to find some guidance videos on YouTube, for example, that guide you through that 478. 1-to-2 ratio breathing. They essentially all refer to some kind of change in the frequency or the relative length of inhales and exhales. So a 1-to-2 ratio breathing, for example, would be that you breathe in for a count of 1, but you breathe out for double the count. So if I were to breathe in for a count of, say, 3, then I would breathe out for a count of 6. And then repeat, breathe in for a count of 3. Breathe out for a count of 6. And that takes advantage of the fact that longer exhales, exhaling longer than you're inhaling, has a naturally calming effect. 478 works in a similar way, except that you're counting also the breath hold. So it's a count for an in of 4, hold for a count of 7, and breathe out for a count of 8. Diaphragmatic breathing refers to not so much the count of the breath, but a focus on where you feel the breath is moving. So rather than breathing into the chest, which is what tends to happen when we're anxious or stressed, it's short, and we kind of breathe into the chest and our shoulders raise. Instead, what we're trying to do is breathe into the abdomen. So the chest and the shoulders stay still, and in fact we notice our tummy moving out. And our tummy moving in and out is indicative of better diaphragmatic control. And so a better breath is one that's considered, a deeper breath is one that's considered to fill the tummy rather than to fill the chest. So there's a cool little, I'll see if it will run in here. There's this video from Calm, who make a meditation app. And I'm pretty sure I found this on YouTube. And yes, I did. And it just uses a really simple visual metaphor of an expanding and shrinking circle to help you get the ratio of the inhale to the exhale right. So we'll play it and see how it goes. I think you get the point. So I'll make sure to include a link to that video in the information underneath this video as well. And so that could be really useful, especially if you're sitting down to study and you're at your desk and you can actually fire that up in front of you on YouTube, put a set of headphones in. I don't know if the audio came through in the presentation there, but there's kind of like a chime type sound in the background that's helping to match the inhale and exhale on the screen. So use a visual metaphor or a guide like that to help get your kind of breathing into some kind of pattern, and as you get your breathing into some kind of pattern, it can help take that the edge off that distress. Alrighty, so that was a reasonably long video, about an hour and 5 in. It is the longest of the sessions, so the other videos are a little shorter than this one. In terms of manifesting and implementing what we've talked about in this session into your everyday life, this is my challenge to you. So I'm keen for you, and this is kind of regardless of this stuff, I'm keen for you to set yourself a time and a place each day to start your work. So if you don't already have in your diary or in your calendar the times for study spread throughout the week that take into consideration your lecture schedule and other bits and pieces that you do, then start there. Get these times and places into the diary that are your study times. And then when you set down to one of those study times, I want you to engage in a process of using a few of these strategies that we've talked about in the sessions thus far. So maybe a mindfulness exercise to get present, maybe a diffusion exercise to manage any kind of like a busy, kind of scattered mind, maybe an acceptance exercise if you're sitting down in a state of significant kind of in an emotional state, whether positive or negative, or pleasant and unpleasant might be a better phrasing there, to use an acceptance exercise. Or if you're sitting down in quite an anxious, overwrought state, then one of the breathing exercises. Now, when we did the exercises, they might have taken 5 or 10 minutes at a time, depending on how long we were doing them. It doesn't necessarily have to be that long in the ritual that you set for yourself. You might decide that you'll take about a minute of deep breathing when you set down to do your work. So it's not going to eat much into your actual study time, but it is a significant investment in that moment of getting present and opening up and making room for what it is you need to do. And then after you've done that, after you've taken some time to do a mindfulness or diffusion or acceptance exercise, I want you to articulate clearly what your first task is, and then start that task. And then I want you to observe over the course of the next hour or a couple of hours or next day or so how often and of what kind you get derailed along the way. Have you procrastinated? Did you manage to study for that length of time pretty much uninterrupted? Did you find yourself doing other things, going onto social media, getting distracted by other things? And take some note of that, right? And then each time you find yourself distracted from the task, I want you to bring yourself back to that start ritual, that start study ritual. And I'll emphasize this even more in the next session and in the final one as well. This notion of a ritual that you develop as you lead into a study period is something I'm really keen for you to build. And I'm keen for you to build not only just a ritual itself, but embed into it these psychological tools that we're learning in this program. Alrighty, so slides and audio and video recordings can all be found in this Dropbox folder. I'll put a copy of this video in there as well, and I'll put a link to this Dropbox folder in wherever you find this video. Enjoy the rest of your week. If you're watching this video on a week-by-week basis, I'll see you in about a week's time. Otherwise, I'll just see you here for the next session. If you've got any feedback or questions, please just contact me directly, and I'll do my best to answer them to the best of my ability. Otherwise, thank you for your attention and focus today. I really appreciate it, and good luck with your studies and making progress, and I'll see you in the next video.